The first craft is a dandelion press craft. The one there on the right I made by rubbing an actual dandelion hard on paper and the pollen colored a yellow circle, and then afterwards I drew around it with a pencil. On the left there I took an actual dandelion and I pressed it very hard onto the paper, and I left it flower side down, and I put an incredibly heavy dictionary on it, and I left it there for a whole week. And when I took the dictionary off, a lot of the flower petals and some of the green fringe around it has been pressed into the paper, so it's stuck to the paper. And then I could draw the stems and leaves around that. So you can experiment with different types of flowers. You could even put a flower petal and then something over it, like another piece of paper, and use something like a meat hammer or a wooden mallet to press the flower petal color into the paper. The next craft is making stick bugs. So I found a little skinny stick that said bug to me, and I painted on some little eyes. You could use googly eyes, you could use stickers if it were smooth enough stick. And for the legs I just used the twisty ties that came off of bread. A simpler version uses a thicker stick. Might be easier for the little ones to draw on the eyes. They can paint the whole thing green or anything they want to do to decorate it. Add on wings, and the legs are just pipe cleaners. They could use different colors. It might be fun to then photograph your little bug creations out in their natural habitat. So here's one crawling over a log, or maybe trying to smell the flowers. Next up is Fairy Picnic. So you see I took a flattish rock and I painted on a picnic blanket and a cupcake. Another flat rock I just painted an apple as if it were on a plate. Or maybe your fairies or garden gnomes just want to go camping. So there's a painted camper rock from thecountrychicCottage.com. What about a fairy taco? I found a rock that was a sort of taco shape in itself, and I just painted the whole thing to look like a taco instead of painting it 2D on a sort of plate. So you can, of course, think of whatever food a rock reminds you of and paint it like that. Next we have impressions. So I took some natural modeling clay and I made sort of coins out of it. On one I pressed a sprig of the end of a tree branch, little leaves on it, and the other one was tree bark. And after I'd made the impression, I let them dry completely, and then I used a paint wash. So I made a very watery paint, and then I gently brushed it over so that you could get all the texture and still have the color to show where the deeper parts are. You could use polymer clay for this. You might get a little bit different impression based on the kind of clay that you use. Of course, you could put a hole through it, make little charms. You could make coasters if they were big enough. So you just experiment with different impressions and maybe a little bit of science. What makes a good impression? This could lead to something about how fossils are made, because some things that are really soft don't make good impressions. I tried to use a dandelion and press it deeply into the clay, and it was just too soft. And now we have how to make sun print fabrics. I discovered this on a website called Tinker Lab, and this is also a art experiment with a little bit of science to it. So you take a piece of cotton fabric and get it really wet, and then you take some paint, a regular acrylic paint, and you water it down 1-to-1 equal parts paint and water, and use a big brush to paint the entire wet surface of the cloth. You could use more than one color, but if little ones are inclined to mix everything together into a big muddle, you might want to start with one color. And then you lay carefully on the fabric things like leaves, flowers, anything that will lay really flat on the fabric. If it's too bumpy or it's not making good contact with the fabric, it won't make a very clear impression. And then you leave this whole fabric and leaf assemblage out in the sun for an hour or two, or longer if it's not super sunny out, until it's completely dry. If it's extremely sunny, you might have to mist it a little bit for the first half an hour just to make sure it doesn't dry too quickly. And that's because what's happening is where the fabric is not covered, it's evaporating more quickly. So it's drawing out the moisture from underneath the leaves where there is more moisture out from under them. So that paint is lighter there by the time everything is dry. So a little science, a little art, and a beautiful piece of fabric or a t-shirt, apron, whatever you're using to make this craft. Finally, nature art can be just as simple as painting with something like some pine needles or different kinds of branches, or even painting with a flower or grass. You could tie it on a stick like they have here from applegreencottage.com, or you could even just hold in your hand some branches and see what you can paint with. Let nature be your inspiration.